Good. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So welcome to what is the official launch of the Band Scholar Project here at an African American Studies Department at UC Berkeley. Thank you all for being here. It's a real pleasure to see you all. My name is Michael Marcohen. I'm an associate teaching professor in American Studies and African American Studies. I'm going to kick things off for us. And I just want to begin with our land acknowledgement, which is to say that we join you today from the campus of UC Berkeley, sited on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. We acknowledge and pay respect to Muwekma Ohlone ancestors, people today, and the Muwekma Ohlone future to come. One way to make concrete such acknowledgements is through the payment of Shumi land tax, a material way for non-Indigenous peoples living in the East Bay to participate in the rematriation of land to Indigenous peoples. With this in mind, the Department of African American Studies began a practice of giving Shumi quarterly to the Indigenous women-led Sogoreté Land Trust, an urban land trust founded in 2012 with the goals of returning traditionally Chochenyo and Karkan lands in the San Francisco Bay Area to Indigenous stewardship and cultivating more active reciprocal relationships with the land. You can find more information on Shumi land tax at the sogoretelandtrust.org. Now, just to begin with the Band Scholars Project. So I've already, I am Michael Cohen. I'm the co-director of the Band Scholars Project, along with my fabulous colleagues, Nikki Jones, Professor Eula Taylor, and Tiana Pichel. The Band Scholars Project was conceived in the face of the current wave of bans on DEI, African American Studies, Ethnic Studies, and Women and Gender Studies education in public universities by right-wing state legislatures across the nation in states like Florida, Texas, Utah, and Indiana. Funded by a generous grant from the Mellon Foundation, this project was inspired by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' claim in a speech announcing that banning the DEI programs in ethnic studies teaching in Florida, that students interested in critical race theory or gender studies should, in his words, go to Berkeley. Now, while we appreciate the governor's endorsement of our campus, its ongoing influence in these fields, and Berkeley's legacy as a bastion of free speech rights, it clearly comes as an open threat, not just to the teaching of race and gender in Florida, but also to public higher education nationwide. After all, Ron DeSantis is not the first politician, nor will he be the last, to attempt to follow Ronald Reagan's footsteps by riding a hatred of all things Berkeley into higher office. And while Ron DeSantis failed in his attempt to turn his war on woke into a serious presidential bid, I blame the shoes, the national drive to ban these essential fields continues to spread across the nation. In the face of this obvious existential threat, not just to these specific and vital fields, but to the entire project of academic freedom and free speech at the public university, our campus leadership has remained inexplicably silent. From a certain entrepreneurial point of view, Ron DeSantis' backhanded compliment to Berkeley was easily the greatest missed opportunity for fundraising in Cal's recent history. Nevertheless, if our campus leadership cannot show a fundamental commitment to defending the public purpose and public good of the public university, then it must fall to us. After all, it is we, principally the inhabitants of the 5th and 6th floor of this building, who do the teaching in this dangerous and increasingly banned field. We are the ones who are explicitly under attack. Oh, and I am already starting this presentation. Okay. And we believe, as this grant affirms, that to be part of the public university must be to defend the public university, and that it is our common responsibility to advocate for our students, to defend for the diversity of our staff and faculty, and to stand for the greater civic good embodied by African American studies and public higher education in general. The Band Scholars Project is an attempt to push back against these divisive, racist, sexist, and homophobic state policies with the strongest weapon available to us: solidarity. And so we are committed to inviting scholars from around the country who are facing this threat directly in their classrooms, on their syllabi, with their students, and in their daily experience on campus. So today we welcome Alisha Gaines from Florida State University to kick off this ambitious project. Today, we'll feature her innovative and substantial contribution to the field of African American studies as a scholar. But we hope you will also join us here on Friday when we will, same place, same time, Friday at noon, where we will explore explicitly the politics of this moment in a public conversation between Professor Gaines and Professor Robin D.G. Kelley from UCLA. You can learn more about this project by visiting our departmental website, and pay attention because we have big plans to escalate our activities in the fall. So just a quick round of thank yous, certainly to Alisha Gaines for being our first band scholar and so warmly accepting our invitation, to Brandy Summers, who will be moderating today's conversation, to Alexandra and Francesca, our graduate student assistants, to our co-sponsors in the Social Science Matrix, to Berkeley English, the Berkeley Geography departments, who we're represented today, to the Social Science Matrix, and to Eva Cito, who has helped in hosting us, and of course the Department of African American Studies, who is capably helmed by our illustrious Professor Nikki Jones and her incredible staff support of Sandy Richmond and Maria Herrera. We want to thank the indomitable organizing talents of Barbara Montano, without whom none of this would actually be happening. And we want to thank for the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for paying for all of it. And with that, I will hand it over to Brandy, who will get the formal introduction started. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Gaines today. Gosh darn it, this is easy. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm also moderating the conversation, which really means I'm taking the Q&A portion. So I probably will have questions myself, so I always do. So I'll probably jump in there as well. But to begin, Dr. Alisha Gaines is the Timothy Gannon Associate Professor of Arts and Science in the Department of English and affiliate faculty of the African American Studies at Florida State University. She is also the co-humanities director of the Evergreen Plantation Archaeological Field School, yes, in Edgard, Louisiana. I didn't know that. She earned a PhD in English and a certificate in African American Studies from Duke University in 2009. From 2009 until 2011, she held a Carter G. Woodson postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Virginia. Her first book, Black for a Day, Fantasies of Race and Empathy, was published with UNC Press in spring of 2017. The project rethinks the political consequences of empathy by examining mid to late 20th and 21st century narratives of racial impersonation, enabled by the spurious alibi of racial reconciliation. Black for a Day constructs a genealogy of mostly white liberals who temporarily become Black under the alibi of racial empathy. Its genealogy includes the magical racial change of a white senator in the 1947 musical Finian's Rainbow, journalist Ray Sprigle, 4 weeks as a Black man in the South in 1948, journalist and memoirist John Howard Griffin, 5 weeks as a Black man in 1959, also temporary. Grace Halsell's stunt as a Black woman in Harlem and Mississippi for 6 months in 1969. And the families of the Sparks and the Wurgles switching race for a reality television show in 2006. The project's epilogue then turns to the cultural nerve struck by the viral media story of Rachel Dolezal, what's her new name? Nzenga Nkechi Diallo, Nkechi Diallo, a former NAACP chapter president, right? Who was outed for claiming she was Black and still continues to hold on to that story. An award-winning educator, her interdisciplinary teaching interests include African American literature and culture, Black queer theory, media and performance studies, narratives of passing, and Black Southern studies. A student of Black South, she is currently working on 2 book projects, Playing a Slave, Race and Performance in the Transatlantic Imaginary, and secondly, Children of the Plantationocene, which is going to be the subject of her talk today. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Alisha Gaines.
Hello, everyone. So before I begin, let me say a lot of thank yous. First to Michael Cohen for a jaw-dropping invitation to come to UC Berkeley. Like I literally pinched myself, I'm not kidding. Um, to Barbara Montano, I don't know where, okay. For making this visit absolutely so easy. And to Brandy Summers for that very generous introduction. I'd also like to thank Chair Nikki Jones, the legendary Eula Y. Taylor, Tiana Paschal, and the rest of the team behind the Mellon-funded Band Scholars Project, the Social Sciences Matrix, as well as the Departments of English and Geography for their support. I am overwhelmed by the rich legacy of this place, of the sixth floor particularly, and as we give land acknowledgements, I have to acknowledge the hallowed ground that we're standing on. This project represents one of the most material demonstrations of solidarity and forceful defenses of public education I've ever experienced in my career. So as a temporary refugee from Florida, I am honored and humbled to be the inaugural band scholar. Thank you. Okay. Children of the Plantationocene. Bear with me because this starts off with an anecdote about my grandmother, and she just passed in September, so bear with me. 1, what Grammy and Pops know. My 94-year-old grandmother, aka Grammy, insists our people come from Virginia, and but maybe Georgia, and but maybe all one word. It is the ambiguity of our afterlives, indicative of migrations great and small. From somewhere to Roanoke, Virginia, from somewhere to Whitesville, Georgia, and but maybe West Virginia, and but maybe is a dislocation and an unknowing, shaping the contours of Black Americanness and its complicated relationship to ideas of home. As Nanny told Janie in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, you know, honey, us colored folks is branches without roots, and that makes things come round in queer ways. Erasure, shame, violence, anger, myth, and amnesia conspire to make strangers, as Saidiya Hartman claims in Lose Your Mother, A Journey Along the Transatlantic Slave Route. Others might call us orphans. Searching for a Black American sense of place, to borrow from Catherine McKittrick, can look like an ancestry report on 23andMe, displaying newly adopted flags from countries never visited, or wandering through castles and dungeons on the shores of West Africa amidst touristic declarations of welcome home, brother and sister. Arguably, no one searched for a Black American sense of place more famously than Alex Haley looking to name his ancestors. Well, everyone else could do the PowerPoint. Okay. That search, documented in his 1976 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, Roots, The Saga of an American Family, fed a deep psychic and cultural need. Firstly, to reframe narratives around enslavement, and secondly, that ancestry, belonging, and home could be a knowable possibility. This is not only evidenced by the text spending 46 weeks on the New York Times bestseller nonfiction list and 22 weeks at #1, but also the Roots universe its popularity birthed from the 1977 television miniseries, boasting the record-breaking 51.1% of all US homes tuning into the series finale, and its staggering 37 Emmy nominations, to the televisual spin-offs. Roots, The New Generation, 1979, Roots, The Gift, 1988, Queen, 1988, and the 2016 History Channel commissioned remake of the original series. Haley finding his Gambian ancestor, Kunta Kinte, inspired a generation's search to find their own. However, While Kunta occupies a large space in the Black American literary and cultural imagination, the novel is what Haley would call faction, a portmanteau of fact and fiction. Through the years, historians and literary critics have called Haley out for plagiarism, outright fabrication, and impossible to corroborate details, so much so that while the text is record-breaking, it fails to be canon-making, left out, as Michael Patrick Hearn points out in the New York Times, of the Norton Anthology of African American Literature. Haley tries to anticipate the critiques from these peer reviewers in the last methodology chapter of his narrative. He writes, "To the best of my knowledge and of my effort, every lineage statement within Roots is from either my African or American family's carefully preserved oral history, much of which I have been able conventionally to corroborate with documents. Those documents, along with the myriad textual details of what were contemporary indigenous lifestyles, cultural history, and such that gives Roots flesh, have come from years of intensive research in 50-odd libraries, archives, and other repositories on 3 continents. I'm not interested in what is true here. I am much more interested in the kind of factional work, the emotional truth Haley models as necessary to understand one's place as a Black person who descends from the enslaved in the United States. It is what I call Haley's apocryphal methodology. This is not to dismiss the disciplinary fact-checking work of history, but to recognize how story can operate in the wake of dehumanization, miseducation, and archival erasure. Just as my grandmother's "and but maybe" tries to conjure a geographical orientation for her 4 grandchildren and 8 great-grands, whether Kunta existed as imagined, he exists as imagined, and he exists in many ways on both sides of the Atlantic. Case in point, in 2011, during the Gambian International Roots Homecoming Festival, a heritage week to attract tourists from the African diaspora, the Department of State for Tourism and Culture renamed St. James Island, a site of African-European encounter from the 14th to 20th centuries and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Kunta Kinte Island, Kinte with an H. We see Haley's factional imagination at work again, this time in the posthumously published Queen, the story of an American family based on the life of Queen Jackson Haley, Haley's paternal grandmother, a white passing woman born the daughter of her enslaver, James Jackson III, and an enslaved woman named Easter. Haley, in collaboration with David Stevens, writes, that Jas had a slave mistress was one thing. That he would now have a slave child, Queen, was something else. It happened everywhere. They were called children of the plantation, a euphemism for bastards got by their white massa. And you saw them running around, coffee-colored replicas of their sires, who had no real place in either world, sometimes paternally shunned and despised, or more often, ignored, sometimes taken in by their white families. They still had no expectation of a future other than slavery. Often they were despised by the Black communities. Slaves and Black, they were also something else, something apart, something separate and different, end quote. The euphemism described here, children of the plantation, is apocryphal. Wikipedia, for example, has a separate entry on the phrase, but no historical record beyond Haley's citation. However, beyond just the bastards of the novel, I argue the phrase still names a useful way to think about what we inherit in the afterlives of slavery. The recent increase in popular cultural representations of contemporary Black folk being forced back on the plantation or found still on the plantation well after emancipation. And here I'm thinking of films like Alice, starring Keke Palmer, it's terrible. Antebellum with Janelle Monáe, and the Hulu adaptation of Octavia Butler's Kindred, signals a socio-political anxiety about what could really be at stake by attempts to make America great again. It is an alleged greatness requiring the free extraction of labor from Black bodies. I would argue as important as reimaginings of West Africa are to Black placemaking, so too is excavating and reconsidering Black America's relationship to the plantation. Do I need to say it? That relationship is complicated. After the world witnessed Derek Chauvin murder George Floyd, sparking our Black Spring and its subsequent whitelash, plantations are a more contested site in our sociopolitical imaginary than seemingly ever before. In August 2020, MacArthur Genius, an award-winning historian of enslavement, Tiya Miles, asked in the Boston Globe, "What should we do with plantations?" There were a couple of responses. For example, in May 2021, Travel Noir, it's like a digital media platform basically aimed at millennials, published an article entitled "Kirk Brown, the Black Man Shifting the Glamorization of Plantation Homes." In it, Brown, a Virginia native, describes his 30th birthday trip to Louisiana. Quote, "I wanted to dig deeper into plantation culture. It's almost like the ancestors were speaking to me. I visited the Whitney Plantation Museum during my trip, and I was moved to tears." End quote. When Travel Noir posted the article on the platform formerly known as Twitter, it quoted Brown's concluding challenge with an added query. "I challenge other Black American travelers to visit at least one plantation home, to just absorb it, get a feel for your history. It does something to you and awakens the conscience. TN fam, have you ever visited a plantation?" Reactions from the fam were swift and negative and overwhelmed with iconic GIFs visualizing their emotions. Michael Jordan was crying, Bugs Bunny was saying no in his cartoonish way, Shannon Sharpe of Club Shay Shay fame pursed his lips and shook his head. At Jelani James 5 tweeted a more emphatic solution to Brown's invitation to visit a plantation. Quote, "I'd rather burn them all down." That provocative suggestion received, as of this writing, 647 likes. The article itself, only 341. With similar resentments, artist and actor Jill Scott went on a plantation tour during summer 2020 while filming on location. While she didn't want to burn it down like Twitter's Jelani, she had other ideas, and I'll let her tell it. Uh-oh, I've lost the audio. Oh, there it is.
To a plantation. I didn't know how I was going to feel when I saw it because I was on to a plantation. I didn't know how I was going to feel when I saw it because I actually never saw one before. But we pulled up and I noticed the beautiful trees. And I noticed as we got closer, this beautiful white building. And there were people walking all around and taking pictures and sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, sipping lemonade. So pretty. So I decide I'm going to take the tour. All right, I'm here. Let me take the tour. So I take the tour, and they're walking through the parlor and talking about how they would host guests and serve brandy and tea and have conversation, and music would be played. And everybody's going, oh no, don't touch the furniture. And we went through the dining room and all the mahogany chairs and the chandeliers and things as such that had to have, candlelit. And the draperies and the carpets. And we go upstairs and we see the bedrooms and how tidy things were expected to be. And then we get back downstairs and, I forgot about the, what do you call them? Slop jars. And the lady shows us a picture, and there's a bunch of pictures on the wall, and she says, notice how no one really smiled back then. And I looked at those faces, and I decided that I was going to get away from this tour and take my own little trip. So I did. And I don't know what happened, but somebody took a long, hot piss on that dining room carpet. I bet whoever it was wishes they had more piss. They make these places into bed and breakfasts that people come from around the world to stay in. They offered me the slave quarters. Oh, it's remodeled. It's beautiful. I bet you wouldn't be going to no bed and breakfast at Auschwitz. Chew on that.
Well, I'm not going to co-sign protest by PP. Jill's anger is a valid response to the nostalgia and miseducation operating at the site she visited. Okay. And what she described is very typical. And I say that as someone who's taken roughly 25 to 30 plantation tours throughout the Southeast, from the river parishes of Louisiana to Savannah and Thomasville, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida, Tallahassee, Florida, and the iconic spring pilgrimage of Natchez, Mississippi. Most plantation museums still venerate whiteness at the downplaying or outright erasure of the Black folk who built the cherished big house, as they protect the furniture, writing myths about their own inheritances. Who protects the memories of the people who lived and labored in those now beautifully gentrified cabins? This disregard prompts us to consider Christina Sharpe's question in the Wake on Blackness and Being. What does it mean to defend the dead? Understanding the tangled affective registers of anger, grief, and shame animated at these sites for descendants of the enslaved, Sharpe begins to answer that question, insisting that defending the real, fictive, and socially dead requires a real uncovering of the remaining present and presence of the histories of slavery on contemporary Black life. How does one memorialize chattel slavery and its afterlives, which are unfolding still, she asks. Her answer is a theorization of the afterlives of slavery through the promiscuous metaphor of the wake. For Sharpe, the wake includes, quote, the keeping watch with the dead, the path of a ship, a consequence of something, in the line of flight and or sight, awakening and consciousness. Through the wake, Sharpe contextualizes the sobering fact of Black life in the United States, that the project of emancipation is unfinished. In the unfolding of afterlives and aftermaths, Sharpe asks we acknowledge our unfreedom and engage in what she calls wake work. Wake work acknowledges the precarity of freedom in this country while insisting freedom dreaming, to borrow from Robin D.G. Kelley, can and should be an epistemological practice. This is a practice, I would insist, and not a theoretical exercise. I say this from experience. As some Black folk raged at the idea of visiting one plantation and others plotted or performed property damage, I was, and this is where Black English is helpful because I struggle to say living, so I'll say in our vernacular, I stay on a plantation. Here I don't mean I stay on land once associated with monocropping and forced labor, whose histories are now only indexed by cookie-cutter subdivisions like Plantation Oaks in Tallahassee, the former cottonseed of Florida. I mean I literally work, sleep, eat, and stay on an antebellum plantation. Seated on the west bank of the Mississippi River in Edgard, Louisiana, is a marvel of architectural and historical preservation. No, I'm not talking about the white, columned neoclassical big house facing the Mississippi River with its cascading double staircase and stately wrought iron gate. If you've seen the films Django Unchained, Antebellum, Roots 2, Will Smith's Emancipation, and or The Free State of Jones, you've seen that house. Even if you haven't seen those films, you can easily imagine that house, and you'll have to because I refuse to show its image. Evergreen Plantation is a still working sugarcane farm situated in St. John the Baptist Parish. Established in the late 18th century, it is the most intact plantation in the Southeast. Boasting the highest historic designation available, the property is complete with 37 antebellum buildings, including 2 big houses, 2 pigeonniers, 2 garçonniers, stables, a privy, and a kitchen, as well as its original agricultural acreage. It stages the iconography of what we want, dare I say, need a plantation to look like, which is why it's a darling of the film industry. Hollywood loves that house because America's sense of itself, our national mythos, loves that house and wants just like it. Instead, what I find marvelous lies roughly half a mile behind that house, down a crushed oyster shell road shaded by an oak alley. 22 original, all still standing cabins that once housed generations of the enslaved and their descendants from the 1830s to the 1940s. Configured symmetrically with porches facing each other, the cabins are built in the double row, double pen style originating in Haiti, meaning they're essentially one-room duplexes with like a double hearth fireplace in the middle. So 2 hearths, 1 chimney. And then they've got 5 to 6 people, strangers and family, housed on each side of the duplex. The first time I visited those cabins in summer 2021, I was asked to hold a reverential silence as we walked through the quarters. This was to call attention to the sacredness of the place, structural remnants of a neighborhood unlike anywhere else in existence in the US Southeast. The cabins testify to the village of Black folk who stayed there, labored there, and made them a home, as well as the resilience of the direct descendant community who can factually and not just factionally claim it as part of their own origin story. Evergreen is a complicated place, admittedly one that has changed my own sense of place and self. It is confounding, it's beautiful, it's haunting, it's haunted, it's horrible, it's magical, it's disgusting. But when I walk its grounds, I wonder if it could be an and but maybe of my own, an emotional truth, an incorrect answer to what my Grammy both knows and speculates. My visit was not part of a plantation tour. I was consulting on an archaeological survey that would eventually become the Evergreen Plantation Archaeological Field School, or EPAFS. The quarters has and will continue to be the force of EPAF's work. Excavating near the cabins has taken place over the last 3 summers in the plantation to plant ecological disaster zone, known by 2 interrelated monikers, the heritage tourism branding of plantation country and the sickening branding of Cancer Alley. During my first residential summer, I learned to surface excavate as I pulled shards of glass, pottery, Civil War era bullets, buttons, and chain link out of the ground. The artifacts recovered offered me the opportunity to suture my own training in English and African American studies to the material cultures of the plantation in ways that have deeply transformed my pedagogy. And that summer, we realized as a team that Evergreen had a mission beyond the standard 1-hour plantation tour, typical among the big house museums up and down River Road. There was an opportunity to transform the site into an interdisciplinary and multimodal classroom We saw it as both an answer to Tiya Miles's question and wake work, and also a rebuke of the kinds of white supremacist, myth-making, failed presidential hopefuls are made of, and it was the boots. Administered by the Institute for Field Research, ePaths launched with a full undergraduate and graduate cohort in summer 2023. Unlike some field schools that focus nearly exclusively on the dig, ePaths is interdisciplinary. Students took a hands-on archaeological methods class in the morning, a Black Studies course on the plantation and its afterlives with me, and a course on the literatures of the Afro-Gulf South with my colleague from FAMU. As co-humanities director of the program, I insisted our students learn a fuller context for the artifacts found on site. Another mission of ePaths is to follow the lead of the local descendant community. For example, as long as anyone can remember, there have been rumors of the existence of a church near the cabins. While the church isn't on any map of the property, our lead archaeologist prioritized these oral histories over the supposed objective truth of the maps. We invited members of the community, some of which had been born on that plantation and lived in those cabins, to tell and show what they remembered. Mr. Simon, called Pops, he's 90-something years old. He still drives himself. It's wild. He walked us through the grounds, adamant there was a church there in his childhood, and ground-penetrating radar proved something was where Mr. Simon indicated. After days of excavating, the team found not only a brick chimney fall indicating a former structure, but also a glass candelabra with a mold of a crucified Jesus giving it its shape. And it's very funny to watch a bunch of scientists yell, "We found Jesus, we found Jesus." What had once been apocryphal now had its evidence. ePaths offers a remedy to the current suppression of Black history that has become a feature of this current culture war. And I use that phrase with every bit of hesitation because it does not fully name what it is in actuality, just anti-Black violence. As an educator at a public university in Florida, I teach African-American literature and culture a 22-minute walk to the Capitol building where a Republican supermajority and a despotic governor wages war on women, on queer and trans folks, on immigrants, on teachers, on students, the very notion of education itself, and on us. So when Sharpe asks, how do we defend the dead? The import of wake work in this moment becomes clear. Attacks on the dead become attacks on the living. 2, what we think we know. It is not just what we inherit then, but also perhaps what we tolerate, create, and sustain. In Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Plantationocene, a manifesto for ecological justice in an age of global crises, Janae Davis and her co-authors use Black geographies to unsettle the Anthropocene and its Eurocentric discourse. They write, "The Anthropocene suggestion that humanity writ large is responsible for catastrophic environmental change has been the subject of extensive and indispensable critique. Instead, it is the notion of Plantationocene that attracts our attention." Initially theorized by Donna Haraway and Anna Singh, but framed in ways ignoring the realities and consequences of racial production, Davis et al. Suggest, quote, "The spatial history of the plantation is central to understanding the nature of power in the modern world, highlighting the ways the plantation dynamics have proliferated beyond historical slave agriculture in the Americas," end quote. Defined by monocropping, racial hierarchies, and attempts to shape the natural world through coercion and control, the Plantationocene names the consequential afterlives of slavery and its enduring permutations and spatial logics, including, I'm citing Clyde Woods here, quote, "enclosures and reserves, industrial estates and mill villages, free trade and export zones, enterprise and empowerment zones, ghettos and gated communities, suburbanization and gentrification, game preserves and tourist resorts, pine plantation and mines, and migratory and prison labor," end quote. the Sharpian unfolding still. So, as children of the Plantationocene, how do you defend the dead? 3. What saints and prophets know? No one defends the dead like Saint Toni Morrison. Her lyrical novel, A Mercy, published in the most racial, not post-racial moment of 2008, prefigures the epoch we are calling the Plantationocene, but the signs of its emergence abound throughout the text. It is set in a late 17th century world Morrison describes as, quote, a mess, an ad hoc, disorganized world. The 1705 Virginia slave codes aimed to tidy through acts of dominion and domination. At the center of the novel, typifying that mess, was something akin to, but not quite, a small family, a mismatched brood, all with different investments in and understanding of this American wilderness, including Jacob Vark, an Anglo-Dutch trader, tempted by the status afforded by the promises of whiteness and property, along with his contractually obligated negotiated bride, Rebecca, Lena, a native woman bought by Jacob, Sorrow, a red-headed white girl most consider strange, and Florence, a black girl with, quote, the hands of a slave and the feet of a Portuguese lady, offered to Jacob as payment for a debt. Florence opens the novel with a reassurance. Quote, don't be afraid, my telling can't hurt you, before inducting the reader and her hoped-for audience into an ecological literacy. Can you read? She asks. If a peahen refuses to brood, I read it quickly. And sure enough, that night I see a Minamahi standing hand in hand with her little boy, my shoes jamming the pocket of her apron. Other signs need more time to understand. Often there are too many signs, or a bright omen clouds up too fast. I sort them and try to recall, yet know I am missing much, like not reading the garden snake crawling up to the door saddle to die, end quote. According to Jesse Cohen in Steal Away, Florence defines literacy as the ability to read signs, not necessarily in the sense of the linguistic interplay between sign and signifier, but in the sense of omens and earthly messages, what is written onto the natural world. Florence attempts to read the world around her, mostly to understand the people she encounters in the world they all inhabit, particularly because she struggles to understand her relationship to freedom, unfreedom, and Blackness without her mother, Amina Mahi's guidance. Florence believes her mother chose to give her up in favor of an infant son, confusing, as Cohen argues, her own captivity with maternal abandonment. But Florence wasn't abandoned by her mother. She was suggested to Jacob to settle that debt in order to save her from the precarity of being a girl child in a family of men, to echo Sophia from The Color Purple, or as she puts it, quote, to be a female in this place is to be an open wound that cannot heal. From Minamahi, to protect her daughter from that vulnerability, that openness, is the titular gesture Morrison calls a mercy. Not abandoned, but still orphaned, Florence turns her mother hunger into an obsession with a free black blacksmith who did the ironwork at Jacob's never-lived-in big house. It is to him she tells her story. Although Florence reads expansively in and on the world, as well as more traditionally, since she can both read and write, she still has missing epistemologies. For example, when tasked with traveling to find the blacksmith to help save a smallpox-stricken Rebecca, Florence meets a group of workers whose indenture was extended. They are certain their years of debt are over, but the master says no, Florence ponders. He sends them away, north to another place, a tannery, for more years. I don't understand why they are sad. Everyone has to work. I ask, are you leaving someone dear behind? All heads turn toward me and the wind dies. Daft, a man says. A woman across from me says, young. Without a language for not just race but power, Florence cannot distinguish between forced labor and that of someone like her blacksmith, just as she can't quite place herself in this burgeoning racial hierarchy. It is not until Florence encounters an overly pious group of Christians, the type that can't decipher between their own child and a demon, that she experiences a destabilizing shift in her understanding of herself and what the racialized dehumanization of the Plantationocene was beginning to rot. After one of the group declares, "I have never seen any human this black," Florence laments. Each visitor turns to look at me. I'm in danger, as the dog's head shows. Without touching, they tell me what to do. To show them my teeth, my tongue, they frown at the candle burn on my palm. They look under my arms, between my legs. They circle me, lean down to inspect my feet. Naked under examination, I watch for what is in their eyes. No hate is there, or scare, or disgust, but they are looking at me, my body, across distances without recognition. She continues, I am inside shrinking. I climb the stream bed under watching trees and know I am not the same. I am losing something with every step I take. I can feel the drain. Something precious is leaving me. I am a thing apart. This is Florence's thingification, the scopic logic's withering a black subject into objecthood in the Finian sense of, look, a Negro. Here she becoming a child of the plantation, something else, something apart, something separate and different to again invoke Haley. And although the ones who investigate Florence for evidence of humanity don't have a full articulation of race either, they already know how to perform the choreography of difference. As Florence reckons with what she describes as her withering during this traumatic moment of racial consciousness, I linger with her here because of how she can help us imagine and reimagine the legacies of the plantation, particularly for Black America, at the very moment it is sharpening into legibility. For example, wistful for the blacksmith, Florence lauds his skill. Your ironwork is wondrous to see, she marvels. The glory of shaping metal, your father doing it and his father before him, back and back for 1,000 years. Your work in the world is strong and beautiful, and I think you are also. Although readers should take her dixit estimation of the blacksmith with a grain of salt, when Florence heaps her adoration on him, she urges us to reframe our relationship to the generations of Black artisans, free and not, who labored to create these plantation landscapes. From agricultural and structural engineering to ironwork, child rearing, masonry, farming, brick making, carpentry, cooking, baking, I could go on and on and on. The truth behind plantation labor is one of expertise and craftsmanship. Some of those skills were newly acquired, some were forced, and still others were, like the blacksmith, an inheritance. Florence, as a proto-Black American, what the Christians called Afric and much more, she did not learn to be ashamed of the kinds of work people who looked like her were tasked to do. And since we can locate Florence in a moment before certain types of myth-making, she was not burdened by the dizzying, demoralizing work of reconciling this country's promise of equality with not just its hypocrisy and failures to achieve them, but its gaslighting insistence that no such reconciliation is necessary. Although most plantations are steeped in bygone era nostalgia and lost cause ideologies like the one Jill Scott pissed in, Florence instructs us to think about the generational legacies of Black makers, recovering the plantation as a site of Black creativity, imagination, and placemaking. But let me be clear, I am not being neither romantic or nostalgic here. In this country, romance sedates and nostalgia kills. Florence is not the only character in the novel helping us see our present differently. Similarly, her maternal substitute, Lena, the indigenous woman purchased by Jacob after the bioterrorism of smallpox destroys her tribe, is trying to understand her place in an already apocalyptic world, upturned by dispossession and violence, and also without the precise language of race. Instead, Lena makes difference a vocabulary of geography. People are either Europes or not Europes. Both Lena and Florence offer Black and Indigenous ways of knowing and critique. And for Lena, critique begins with a prophecy. It's a lengthy quote from Morrison, but it's Morrison. Her people had built sheltering cities for 1,000 years, and except for the death feet of the Europes, might have built them for 1,000 more. As it turned out, the prophet had been dead wrong. The Europes neither fled nor died out. In fact, said the old woman in charge of the children, he had apologized for his error in prophecy and admitted that however many collapsed from ignorance or disease, more would always come. They would come with languages that sounded like dog bark, with a childish hunger for animal fur. They would forever fence land, ship whole trees to faraway countries, take any woman for quick pleasure, ruin soil, befoul sacred places, and worship a dull, unimaginative God. They let their hogs browse the ocean shore, turning it into dunes of sand where nothing green can ever grow again. Cut loose from the earth's soul, they insisted on purchase of its soil, and like all orphans, they were insatiable. It was their destiny to chew up the world and spit out a horribleness that would destroy all primary peoples. Here, Lena understands a central aspect of the Plantationocene's critique of anthropocentric discourse, that not everyone is equally responsible for the horribleness of this chewed world. We never shape the world, Lena tells Florence. The world shapes us. That we is instructive, a pronoun indexing who will eventually become the global South, a recognition that there are those who plunder and those plundered, that we don't all have the same appetite and we don't all have the same bite. Or, as Davis et al. Write, quote, the Anthropocene is certainly not the product of human nature or humanity as a whole, but rather interrelated historical processes set in motion by a small minority. This privileged cadre provided the preconditions for the development of global capitalism through processes of either settler colonialization and enslavement, organized and rationalized by racism. Lena's insight comes from watching Jacob, who Florence and Lena call Sir, reach desperately for dominion. When mercy brought Sir and Florence together, Jacob glimpsed Jubileo, the kind of big house, like Evergreen, still dominating our current plantation imaginaries. Although he had seemingly no interest in the nascent slave trade, insisting flesh was not his commodity, Jacob had never seen anything like Jubileo. Even after judging it and its owner for being tacky, he still concludes, so mightn't it be nice to have such a fence to enclose the headstones in his own meadow, and one day, not too far away, build a house that size on his own property. Seduced by what a big house meant in the late 17th century and anticipating what it still means now, Jacob dreamt of a grand house of many rooms. And according to Lena, he was a hurricane of activity, laboring to bring nature under his control. More than once, when Lena brought his dinner to whatever field or woodlot he was working in, she found him, head thrown back, staring at the sky as if in wondering despair at the land's refusal to obey him. For all of Jacob's striving, he never moved into that dreamt-for big house, but in true Morrisonian fashion, his ghost did. As Jacob haunts the edifice of his own ambition, Florence haunts as well. 4. What Florence knows. Towards the end of the novel, readers discover what Florence leaves behind. Using a nail, she has carved each of her 6 first-person narratives woven throughout the otherwise third-person text into the floor and the walls of one of Jacob's empty rooms in the big house. Morrison writes, these words cover the floor. From now on, you will stand to hear me. I am holding light in one hand and carving with the other. My arms ache, but I have need to tell you this. She's writing to the blacksmith, but then remembers he can't read. You won't read my telling, she laments. But rather than be deterred by his illiteracy, she continues to mark the walls with her words, creating what she calls the talking room. While Florence never had the full vocabulary to articulate her racialized experience of captive Black girlhood, she instinctively knew her story was valuable and worth preserving just as much as the house itself. She left an archive as if she prophetically knew this country would revere a romantic plantation past of magnolia blossoms, paternalistic benevolence, and gaudy antebellum decor. Don't forget the mint juleps. When Florence scratches her story into the bones of the Milton Mansion, she subverts every effort, both then and now, to silence it. And unlike the traditional slave narrative, her words were not mediated by white editors, anticipated for white audiences, or constrained by a genre meant to demonstrate how Blackness and humanity could be compatible. Hers was a girl's story about love and sex and loss and abandonment and many fictions of kinship. And yet, Florence also understood that even as it was just becoming legible as such in this historical moment, the plantation could be claimed as a Black space, reimagined as a repository of Black story and placemaking and history instead of just a monument to whiteness and power. As Florence carves her story, she anticipates the needs and wants of those committed to excavating the archive. On April 26, 2020, National Book Award winner and prolific African American studies scholar Imani Perry tweeted, "Don't assume the archives of Black studies don't exist simply because they haven't been collected. There is much unculled material in the world. This is still an archaeological project." What Florence leaves behind is what Black study is in constant search for, traces of our liveness. And while those traces are always tinged by an apocryphal and but maybe, if we are to approach the plantation with an intention to hold space for the Black people who stayed and labored there, we might see the plantation as another origin story, one of resistance, joy, love, craftsmanship, and survival, and not just dehumanization and the porn of Black suffering. Perry's archaeological invocation is instructive, pointing to not only the ongoing work of the field of Black study, but also the excavation still necessary to tell the full truth of Black people's lives, histories, and legacies in this country. Importantly, her assertion evidences why the attacks on Black history and Black people are so insidious. As Florence suggests, what our country could have made sacred, we should remember her assurance at the opening of the novel, "My telling won't hurt you." So, Governor Ron DeSantis, what are you afraid of? Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we have 20 minutes for Q&A. And Barbara is gonna walk around with the microphone for those who are ready to jump in there. Is anyone ready to jump in there with a question?
I'm only taking the microphone as the first one because I know there will be so many questions afterwards, and I won't have the chance. But it's hard. It's hard to talk after everything that you have shared with us. It's so inspiring. It's painful. It's emotional. I have my 6-year-old talks about double dip emotions. Like that's how I have now. I want to. I recently attended. Sorry, I'm Maria. I'm from the School of Education, and I don't know why this room is not full of my people here. I don't understand. I'll make sure more people come on Friday because we have to be part of this conversation. We have to work together. And I was in a room full of educators in March. These are people from the National Academy of Education and the Spencer Foundation. And there was a lot of conversation around, and the conversation was mostly led by white women, talking about the backlash and how hard it is. And then when Black women took over the mic, they started saying, yes, but we knew. Yes, but this has happened before. And what they share that in their context in Florida or Texas, they are the ones staying, the ones moving away, saying I cannot deal with this, and protesting. I'm using like leaving as a sign, as a protest, is it's along racial lines. And so I wanted to ask if you have seen that in your spaces, if there is a new conversation about allyship, and you talk about the solidarity, like this being a space of solidarity. If how do you see that moving forward? What else is there to do, to contest and to resist, but like to really resist? Because to just leave, that's not resistance, really. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Maria, take this up. Okay. Thank you for your question. It's a good one. It's one I think about a lot in Florida. I am losing colleagues left and right. And for all the related reasons, right? All Florida related reasons, but some are leaving academia, some are just, they're not leaving for other jobs is what I'm saying. And so to me, that is a sign of like exhaustion and not being prepared for this fight. And it's not exactly on racial lines, but not one Black colleague has left in my department, if that says something. And so, of course, we've been here before. We'll be here again. Black education in this country has always been, to quote Jarvis Givens, a fugitive pedagogy. And so we have to think of alternative spaces when the state is telling us what we can and can't teach. And I'm teaching illegally in Florida at this point. It's not just what you teach, but how you teach it in Florida. And so that's why Evergreen was a weird answer to this problem, because we were unfettered by the state, and could write and our own curriculum. It didn't go through FSU. It went through a nonprofit, so they couldn't take it from us. I think there's been models to use before, models like freedom schools and things like that. I think we have to think expansively about public education, not just happening in gorgeous spaces like this, but in the places where we're meeting people, to use that quote, on the ground. And I think as far as the allyship and solidarity piece, it's a big question. I have a lot of colleagues who any Florida thing that comes up, they'll send me the article with big caps that say, you've got to leave right now. And while leaving is a something to do, right? It is, staying is also a something to do. And thinking about standing with each other rather than turning your back on Florida. I think to turn your back on the Black South is at your own peril, to be honest, because that's where the most freedom dreaming has ever been done in this country. So we dream again and again and again. Thank you.
Well, and please tell your name and where you're coming from.
My name's William. I'm a PhD student in geography. Thank you so much for your talk. As you were speaking, I had two questions, and I think I'm going to edit the order of which I was originally going to ask them. The first was about, as you were speaking, I was thinking about plantations, and I was thinking, well, I'm a historian of the slave trade, and one of the things you learn is that the conditions of the enslaved largely depended on the type of crop they were farming, right? You compare sugar to cotton, for instance. And I was thinking about the sugar plantation because it had both the agricultural aspect and the factory aspect. It's like C.L.R. James called it in the first modern subjects, right? And so I was thinking about, in terms of the children of plantation, what does it mean to compare, say, a cotton plantation, where you could have lineages of families, to a sugar plantation, which, because of the way they were farming, people have an average life expectancy of like 7 years. So it meant people weren't having kids in there, and their kids weren't growing up there. They were just being worked to death. And so I think then that in terms of black and place, I think it changes that dynamic, right, of actually having kids on the ground versus perpetually kind of feeding through. And the second thing you were speaking about is I recently started reading Lose Your Mother by Saidiya Hartman. And I was reading the first 2 chapters and I found it really funny. Like I found it like a satire. She talks about going to Ghana and expecting kind of this grounding, this whimsical, lovely, radical experience. She gets there and they all make fun of her. They call her a stranger. She realizes she doesn't fit. And she realizes all of those radical ideals she had doesn't quite work on the ground. And so I'm thinking, as you were going through those tours of the plantations, as you were thinking about, I'm thinking about the Great Migration, I'm thinking about class, I'm thinking about people coming from the northern cities back to the south, quote unquote, to visit the plantations. Do you see those similar dynamics there? Do you see people, as you mentioned, looking for nostalgia, looking for a past, but feeling like an outsider?
That last question is a great one. So when I'm on these plantation tours and I'm always by myself, my partner is like, absolutely not. I am largely on plantation tours with white women, overwhelmingly so. And it is, and I'm not trying to be like romantic about this at all. Some of these tours are so terrible. I've had full panic attacks on some of these plantations because the history is so disrespectful at best, outright lies at worst. And so there are often the white women on these tours are looking for, how do I say this? They're trying to imagine themselves as Scarlett O'Hara. I'm so serious. I'm so serious. I've witnessed people literally sitting on the rocking chairs on the porch, like, can't you imagine? And then turning to me and be like, right? Like, there's, and not every plantation does this, but so the Whitney Museum, for those of you who haven't been there, it's in Louisiana, go there. It's it does not stage the big house. It focuses on the history of the enslaved. But McLeod Plantation in South Carolina does this as well. But most of them are giving you lost cause, old South, this kind of nostalgic thing. I went to Oakley House Plantation in Mobile, Alabama. This is just 2 weeks ago. I spent my spring break. Yeah, I need to sleep. Anyway, spent my spring break, and it was high school girls doing the plantation tours in full skirts, and the young woman who was at the docent never said the word slavery ever. There was a brick making operation on that plantation, and when someone asked who built the house, she said the owner and some helpful artisans. So there's a lot of bad history. There's a lot of false narratives. There's a lot of pretending that these are just pretty houses at a lot of these plantations. So, and then your first question, which is about the different types of crops grown and how that changes the relationship to the space, that's a really good one. I find it's interesting in Louisiana because it's primarily sugar, and because of the history of those parishes and because they're Catholic, they just have better records. So direct descendants, even though the toil is different, they have an archive that most of us don't have access to because those who were baptized in the church were recorded in the church. So I have to think more about how cotton and sugar produce a different type of placemaking, but the placemaking still exists. The records are still there, and the descendants and the families still claim those spaces as their own. Thank you for your question, William. I have room for a follow-up. Yeah, go ahead, William.
Okay, Brandon. Just double checking with the moderator.
Sorry.
I think one of the most powerful things you mentioned also had like a conjunction in it. You mentioned when you went back to the Evergreens plantation and you were speaking to one of the elders, and they were saying, you know, they remembered there being a church there, right? And then you mentioned also that you then used like ground radar or LiDAR, and you found there was remnants, and you found this piece. And for me, that was an important conjunction because if you didn't find anything, it wouldn't have nullified that story.
Absolutely.
And so I think like within it, as you were speaking, I was thinking about this distinction between like this material history, right, archaeology, and the kind of not just poetics and literary, but like oral histories. Like it
Right.
didn't matter. They could have found not a single thing in that
Yes,
field.
absolutely.
And that church was there because he said so.
Right.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I was having that conversation with the archaeologist because he kept saying, what do we need to find to prove?
Right.
And I was like, Mr. Simon is right here.
Right.
So like, and then I realized the ancestors are not subtle. And so literally it took Jesus for the scientists to be like, okay, it was a church. When all the rest of the humanity side of the team, not to denigrate our STEM folks, but the humanity side of the team were like, we have the evidence, right? Mr. Simon is the evidence, but it took Jesus for the scientists to believe it, to be honest. Yeah, but I agree with you. Oh, yeah.
Good follow-up.
Yeah.
Other questions? Was your hand up? No. Oh. Yes. Introduce yourself. please.
Hi, my name's Stephen Best. I'm a professor in the English department here. That was a really wonderful talk, so thank you so much. Like I said, I think I have a bunch of questions, but the thing I really want to mention first or foreground is that Christina Sharpe quote. It reminded me of we had Barry Jenkins here a few weeks ago. Oh, Brandy! Yeah, I'm like, wait, yeah, Brandy. Brandy interviewed him one of the, and one of the films he showed was this film called The Gaze. Have you seen it?
I have not.
Oh, you need to try to see it. So when he was making the Underground Railroad, I don't remember, Brandy, you might remember where, like the location of the filming of the Underground Railroad. He ended up making a film of all the Black, what do you call them on plantation? They
Like historical interpreters?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other reenactors.
They were
The
like
reenactors,
living
like the
yeah.
Black, and it's just the Black reenactors, and the film's called The Gaze.
Okay.
And it's about of them looking at the camera. It's the most lyrical and beautiful piece I've seen in a long time. So I just sort of feel like it is the topic that you shared with us today of Barry Jenkins, what he felt his responsibility was in terms of the plantation, right? Just representing, it's non-narrative. The film is entirely non-narrative, and it's just shot after shot after shot of these kind of Black people looking back at the screen. And I just think it's texturally so in sync with what you're doing. So I just wanted to mention that. And I had another thought about the land acknowledgement and the university as a plantation, but
Yeah, I put a plantation acknowledgement in my email signature now.
yeah.
And it's only because of it's after being on Evergreen. But so it's, the university's
Yep.
land acknowledgement,
Yep.
and then I add something like, and the seizure of those lands enabled the conditions for the, exploitation of the Black folks who
Yeah.
lived and labored on the 73 plantations in Leon County, which is where Tallahassee is. 73 plantations in a very small county. And Barry Jenkins is also an FSU grad. Yeah, so I wonder
Yeah.
if he's thinking about there is no land that is not
That
plantation
is not
land.
plantation land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because even with the Underground Railroad, the portraits that he talked about, or I don't know how many of you have seen the series The Underground Railroad, but there are several scenes where you just have the actors staring into the camera, and it's silent, and they're just looking. Their faces are still, and so the silence actually is what's most powerful in the series itself, and then also with the gaze, it's that silence and staring back. So it would actually is there another question? Because I do. Okay, no, go ahead. I'll talk about more afterwards. Please.
Hi, my name's Tafari. I'm a student here in African American Studies and Gender and Studies. Yay! And I'm a former professor over there too. Yay! Thank you so much for this entire, just all of the thinking, many notes. Last May, I had a trip down to New Orleans for a conference that my school was taking part in, and we were had this artist in residency, this indigenous photographer in residency, and she insisted the importance of doing a plantation visit to know the history. Look, I could get into that, but I won't here. But we went to Whitney Plantation, and that was probably one of the most like embodied moments that I had felt, felt history tangibly, just like immediately just turning onto the land. But I wanted to ask in that experience, like there was, even though it's like one of the places that does it more right, like does more justice to that history and talking about the actual people on the land, there were still times where I had like problems, critique, so many like, just like things where I'm like, okay, this is what doing it justice looks like, but why am I still so like viscerally upset? And I was wondering and I think you've given a really amazing framework in terms of like talking about In the Wake and Christina Sharpe and like these kind of like freedom dreamings and imaginings. And I wanted to ask, I guess, like in all of the visits that you have done to plantations, like what would that look like? And this might be too big of a question to answer. What would that look like if we were able to reframe like a plantation, like if you could make something like go like, this is what the history that actually needs to be talked about. These are the people that actually need to be talked about. This is entirely how we reframe the narrative around describing a plantation and having someone visit that space, like in terms of like Black creativity.
A great question. I'm not surprised by your reaction at Whitney. I've been there many times and always have that same reaction, and I have tons of critiques, even though they're doing it better. It's the statue of the kids in the church for me. They all have the same face. Anyway, we can chat. Okay, so this is actually a question that I am actively trying to think about. So, and I just got a grant to do so. Working with, it's a community research partnership grant, working with one of the organizations that sponsors the field school, which is the Descendants Project out of Wallace, Louisiana. And what they want to do, and I am simply funneling resources. This is their thing. They're the ones living in plantation country, Panther Alley. They live in between Evergreen and Whitney, which is owned by the same family. So they are direct descendants of both of those plantations, and they're trying to put together a rubric of best practices so that plantations in those river parishes can earn the designation of a Descendants Project approved tour, meaning that you can walk through that tour and not have a freaking panic attack because of how horrible your people are being talked about or literally ignored or erased. So Whitney is doing it better. Whitney's not doing it perfectly. I don't think any site will ever do it perfectly, but there are folks on the ground in that place trying to work on this question, and I'm just giving them FSU money to do so. Yeah. So this will be, the rubric will be determined by the residents of St. John and St. James Parish.
So we're winding down. Yeah, a couple minutes, so I get to go. So actually, I wanted to encourage you, if you haven't been over to the Art Museum BAMFA over, there's a new exhibit now, and there's a particular piece. It's a film by Allison Janae Hamilton, and she, it's called A House Called Florida. She's from Florida. All her work is focused on Florida, and Al uses this piece to think about the ghosts. And how they've essentially come and rearranged things in the home, but also environmental and ecological degradation. So the thing about considering plantations is that different disciplines do this kind of archaeological work differently. So if you come and have architects, they're going to look at it in terms of the materials that were used. Landscape architects might have a different take. Thinking about literature and English, understanding of the novel. Black Studies is able to encompass, I think, a lot of that work, but to really kind of answer and deal with that question, you can pull apart the house, right? You can pull apart the land and also consider how toxicity and thinking about the industrialized world or the modern world came to impact the home and the land as well. And so that's why it's like I've been so interested. My family's from Louisiana, but not from that Cancer Alley area. But there are areas that are, of course, being taken over by the petrochemical industry and pushing out these free Black towns, or at least what used to be free Black towns, and completely saturating the land. And though it's not where plantations stood or stand, it still has that kind of resonance as we're thinking about loss, but also ghosts. I'm just totally into ghosts. So rather in terms of life and living, it's also the undead, or thinking about the traces that you were mentioning can still exist. Like the chemical doesn't kill the ghost, the storm doesn't kill the ghost, like gentrification doesn't kill the ghost. So there might be these ways to capture all of it, while again taking cues from different disciplines and how they understand the structure and the space, that I think would go beautifully. I'm not giving you suggestions. It's just like that's what's helped. Like I love what you're doing, and that's what I thought about the whole time while you were talking. So anyway, yeah, no problem. Well, can we put our hands together and warmly thank Dr. Alisha Gaines for coming? Thank you. Wonderful, and we're right on time.